Ancient Egypt is one of those civilizations that feels almost mythological. Pyramids that have outlasted empires, gods with animal heads, and rulers who called themselves divine. We know their monuments, we know their art, but there's a dimension of ancient Egypt that almost nobody talks about: the wildlife. Because here's the thing. The Egypt of 3,000 years ago looked almost nothing like the Egypt of today. It was greener, wetter, wilder. The Nile flooded broader banks, grasslands stretched where there is now only sand, and roaming through all of it were creatures so remarkable that some of them became gods and others became hunted into oblivion. Today, we're going to meet the animals that shared their world with the pharaohs. Some still exist elsewhere on Earth, others are gone forever. All of them had a story with ancient Egypt that history barely remembers. If you had to design the perfect lion, bigger, heavier, with a mane so thick it looks like a storm cloud wrapped around its face, you'd end up with something close to the Barbary lion. Known sometimes as the Egyptian lion, this animal was once found across North Africa, including throughout ancient Egypt itself, in the desert fringes, the mountain edges, and the scrublands bordering the Nile, and it was enormous. Adult males could stretch over 8 feet from nose to tail and weigh around 500 to 600 pounds, noticeably heavier than the lions living in sub-Saharan Africa today. Technically, the Barbary lion wasn't a separate species. It was a population of Panthera leo, the northern lion, but a population so physically distinctive that 19th century hunters consistently described it as unlike any lion they'd seen elsewhere. For ordinary Egyptians, this animal was mostly a ghost. It didn't prowl near villages, it was rarely encountered, and maybe that's exactly why it became mythological. Something unseen and untouchable takes on a power that a familiar animal never could. Common people believed these lions guarded the kingdom's borders, standing watch at the edges of civilization like sentinels nobody had ever appointed. The royal class, however, had a very different relationship with the Barbary lion, one that was equal parts reverence and control. Pharaohs kept them, trained them, paraded them. A fully grown male was even found entombed alongside Tutankhamun, buried with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for royalty. 5 lion cubs were discovered mummified as part of a ritual offering, a reminder that in ancient Egypt, being sacred didn't protect you from being sacrificed. Pharaohs also hunted these lions, not out of fear, but to demonstrate they were something beyond human. Amenhotep III famously recorded killing 102 lions over a decade, commemorated on ceremonial scarabs. A man who hunts lions doesn't just rule people, he rules nature itself. That was the message. Eventually, the lions ran out of space. A drying climate, expanding deserts, and relentless hunting pushed them out of Egypt entirely. Captive populations survived in royal courts and later in zoos. The last confirmed individuals died in the 20th century. In the wild? Gone far earlier. Ancient Egypt both worshipped and consumed this animal, and in the end, consumption won. Now, if the Barbary lion represented power through majesty, the next animal represented power through sheer, terrifying bulk. Meet the aurochs. Scientific name Bos primigenius, the wild ancestor of virtually every cow you've ever seen in your life. And I want you to immediately forget everything you associate with the word cow. These animals were enormous. Large individuals weighed well over a ton. Their legs were long and muscular, their necks thick, and their horns swept forward in a curve that made them look less like cattle and more like something that belonged in a prehistoric painting, which, incidentally, they are, having been depicted in cave art thousands of years ago. And their temperament matched their frame. Aurochs were notoriously aggressive, territorial, and independent. They weren't animals that tolerated human proximity gracefully. During mating season, bulls fought each other with a ferocity that frequently turned lethal. These were not herd animals in the gentle, placid sense. They were more like four-legged arguments waiting to happen. Ancient Egyptians hunted them, sold their meat and bones at market, and apparently kept small managed groups, though managed feels like an optimistic word for an animal that would happily gore you for looking at it sideways. What's fascinating is that Egyptians understood the aurochs' temperament, and rather than fear it, they respected it. The aurochs became a symbol of raw strength and virility, the kind of force that even kings wanted to claim association with. The aurochs in Egypt disappeared alongside the civilization itself, with the last Egyptian records dating roughly to Roman times. But elsewhere in the world, small pockets of aurochs clung on. The final individuals survived in the forests of Poland, with the very last aurochs dying in 1627, a species that once ranged across 3 continents, gone quietly in a Polish forest with almost no one noticing. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, big lion, big cow, but what about something genuinely strange? Something that doesn't fit neatly into our mental image of what an animal should look like. Allow me to introduce the Bennu heron. This was a species of heron, yes, like the long-legged birds you might see standing motionless at the edge of a pond, except the Bennu heron was not motionless at a pond-sized. Adults stood roughly 2 meters tall, around 6.5 feet, making them taller than most humans alive today. Their wingspan stretched nearly 9 feet across. To put that in perspective, that's wider than an ostrich's wingspan, and the ostrich is the heaviest bird on Earth. The Bennu heron stalked the wetlands of the ancient Nile, hunting fish, amphibians, small mammals, snakes, and turtles. And given its size, probably anything else that made the mistake of being catchable. Paleontologists believe it was a genuine apex predator of its wetland environment, not in the dramatic lion charging a wildebeest sense, but in the slow, deliberate, nothing escapes me sense that large wading birds embody so perfectly. Many scholars believe that Bennu, one of Egypt's most significant deities, associated with the sun, creation, and rebirth, was modeled directly on this bird. Bennu was depicted as a massive heron, standing atop the primordial mound at the beginning of creation. Its cry was said to have initiated time itself. The cult center of Bennu, located in the ancient city of Heliopolis, was one of the most important religious sites in all of Egypt. So here's a remarkable thought. A real bird, one that actually waded through Nile marshes, hunting frogs and small turtles, may have inspired one of the foundational myths of Egyptian religion. The boundary between the natural world and the divine wasn't a boundary at all. Like several animals on this list, Bennu herons were also buried alongside mummies, placed there to protect the deceased in the afterlife. Their practical and spiritual value ran side by side. By around 1800 BC, the fossil record for the Bennu heron goes silent. Wetland destruction and overhunting are the most likely culprits. The god outlasted the animal that inspired it, which is either poetic or heartbreaking, depending on how you look at it. Most extinct animals are discovered through fossils. The Meidum goose was discovered through a painting. That's it. No bones, no fossils, just a single piece of artwork, roughly 4,600 years old, found on the wall of a tomb at Meidum, which is why the piece is sometimes called the Mona Lisa of Egyptian art. It depicts a group of geese being caught in a net and presented as an offering, and among the birds shown are several that match no known living species. The Meidum goose has color markings and patterning, distinct enough that ornithologists who study the painting believe it represents a genuinely separate species, not simply an artistic interpretation of a red-breasted goose or any other bird we know today. The painter clearly had an eye for accuracy, since the other species in the artwork are recognizable and precisely rendered. The anomalous birds, therefore, are probably exactly what they look like, something that no longer exists. Not every animal on this list was worshipped. Some were simply in the way. The North African elephant was a subspecies of the African bush elephant, but smaller, more comparable in size to Asian elephants than to their enormous African cousins, though they retained the distinctive large ears and concave back typical of African elephants. In the early days of ancient Egypt, they ranged across a wide variety of habitats: grasslands, forests, highlands, even desert fringe environments. And ancient Egyptians, by most accounts, could not stand them. The problem was simple. Elephants eat enormous quantities of vegetation, move in groups, and don't particularly care what's in their path. Crops were destroyed. They were just being elephants. But being an elephant in a farming civilization turned out to be a serious liability. Egyptians responded by driving elephants out of inhabited areas, killing them outright, and enthusiastically harvesting their ivory for carvings and decorative objects. By around 2900 BC, North African elephants had been completely eliminated from the territory of present-day Egypt. Centuries before, the pyramids at Giza were even finished. But that wasn't the end of their suffering. In the territories they retreated to, pharaohs pursued them on hunting expeditions. One recorded hunt alone killed more than 120 animals. They were captured for war, kept in private collections, sent to zoos. Later, Roman demand for exotic animals drove the final nail. North African elephants were imported to Rome for games and spectacles until the population simply couldn't sustain the losses. By the 4th century AD, the subspecies was gone entirely. An animal driven to extinction not through any single catastrophic event, but through relentless, grinding, multi-generational pressure. They never had a chance. And finally, the one animal on this list that actually won, at least for a while. Hippos in ancient Egypt were a menace of truly impressive proportions. They capsized boats. They killed livestock. They destroyed crops on a scale that apparently required royal intervention. And unlike the elephant, which was at least somewhat avoidable, hippos lived right in the Nile, the artery of Egyptian civilization. There was no rooting around them. The situation was bad enough that early pharaohs committed significant state resources to hippo extermination campaigns, organized drives to push hippos out of the marshes and away from populated riverbanks. And those campaigns largely worked. Hippos were gradually pushed south into Upper Egypt, away from the densely inhabited Nile Delta. But even in Upper Egypt, they remained targets. Later, pharaohs conducted ritualistic hippo hunts, not just as pest control, but as symbolic acts representing the triumph of order over chaos. The hippo in Egyptian religion was a complicated figure, sometimes associated with the dangerous god Set, sometimes with protective deities, but always representing an untamable natural force. The stakes were also deeply personal. Pharaoh Menes, the first ruler of unified Egypt, was reportedly killed by a hippo in his 62nd year of reign, carried off and mauled. The founder of Egyptian civilization ended by a river animal. History occasionally has a dark sense of humor. Despite everything, the hunts, the extermination campaigns, the ritual killings, hippos outlasted every other animal on this list in Egypt. Populations survived along the Nile all the way into the early 1800s, long after ancient Egypt itself had become archaeology. They were the last wildlife holdouts of a vanished world. Today, they're locally extinct in Egypt, but globally, they survive. Which means, unlike so many of the animals we've discussed, the hippo's story isn't entirely over. Ancient Egypt is usually remembered through its monuments, the pyramids, the temples, the tombs. But running alongside that human story was a natural one, equally extraordinary and far less documented. If you made it this far, you clearly love this stuff as much as I do. So hit subscribe, because there are plenty more forgotten creatures where these came from. Every week we dig up another piece of natural history that deserves to be remembered. Don't miss it.